Hello, Author Nation. Today, we have the legendary Alex Newton from K-lytics. One of his few appearances in the wild in 2024. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And hello, everybody.
It's a little different for you, right? Usually you're on a Zoom call, you're in your place in Switzerland. And
yeah, I'm in my safe space, in my data dungeon, where I crunch all the numbers. Usually I'm let out only once a day, for a 30-minute walk, and then they put me back in there to continue crunch numbers. So it's first of all, a big privilege to be back online in the podcast. I think it's the only one this year, perhaps two, we just figured. And it's in a beautiful location.
That's the thing. That's why I wanted to do this. And we're together.
And we are probably for the first time ever doing such a recording face to face. Which is, gives it a completely different vibe. I love it already.
Yeah. I mean, we've been on a lot of podcasts. I've had you on. We've talked about stuff, but to be able to do this, it's like you're right. It's just a different vibe. It's so much more fun because we can, bounce things off of each other, and so. But I was hoping what we would do at the time today is talk a little bit about, your expertise in what's happening right now on Kindle Unlimited. I know you were here doing a presentation, but for those that couldn't make it, to understand, one, at some point we need to tell them what K-lytics is and what they can do with the data you have, but really give folks a feeling for what's going on now in the marketplace.
Right. Yeah, the presentations were very much about the market long-term evolutions of the Amazon.com platform in the main, but this time at Ninc we also branched out into what's happening in France, what's happening, how does the market compare in the UK. We looked at Germany, and in the main, though, the last 2 days we looked at long-term evolution, because K-lytics has been there now for 10 years. We had the 10-year anniversary.
Crazy.
For those who don't know, the K is for Kindle, the lytics for the analytics. Remove the Indle from the Kindle due to trademark restrictions, and you get K-lytics. And that's where we are 10 years later. I remember doing the first report on the top 30 categories and how much does romance sell versus non-fiction or versus mystery thriller. That was 10 years ago, and the rest is history. So today, and with this 10-year history, it was very, very interesting the last 2 days to look at some of these long-term graphs, because nobody does that. Also, Amazon does not publish that information, and many tools only look at the real time, what's happening right now on the website.
Maybe 90 days.
And there we go. Once you look at these long-term evolutions, it's a very interesting picture about the market.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Kindle has been there now for almost 17 years. And the first interesting thing is we're the generation that grew up in our corporate life with a BlackBerry. Remember that device?
I do. Never giving it up.
Never give up the BlackBerry. So we showed this graph yesterday with the 20-year evolution of search interest for BlackBerry, and it obviously starting early 2000s, going all the way up there 2005, 2006, and then there was even a documentary, I think, on Netflix or something about BlackBerry, and all the thing going back into oblivion and back to zero. Now compare that to the search interest for the Kindle device, which has a very similar pattern. It goes, all the way up, the big hype after it was launched the first 2-3 years. And then it's going on a decline, as every hype has a decline. But there is still a base search volume for Kindle devices, which is probably around a fifth, if not a quarter, of what that hype was. And here we're talking 17 years later. But the point was, devices come and go, but platforms such as Spotify, or platforms such as Kindle Direct Publishing, now talking about the publishing side of things, the search interest has actually been on the rise after a bit of a slowdown after the gold digging times. Kindle Publishing is on the rise. Can you imagine? And that's like more than 10 years. It's KU that had its 10-year anniversary, but the whole thing has been going up. So I think a great environment still to be in. And of course, one can debate at length, should we go wide? Shall we only put all eggs into one basket? We don't advocate neither direction, but we just take the pulse of what's happening on Amazon because they represent so much of the market.
Well,
you have it.
Yeah, I think the way I think about it when we look at your data is, even if you are thinking about other platforms, you're going wide, whatever it may be, if you're trying to draw statistical significance, we need a model of what the market is. And when you look at what Kindle digital publishing is, it is by far, you could say it is the market, but if you're going to argue with me, okay, it's big enough that it is the model for the market. Like, you can derive, information from that makes sense in these other places as well, right? And the big trends that you're following, like you're not necessarily able to give information about Kindle versus direct, but if you're talking about general interest over time in a specific genre, if romantasy is going up on Kindle, it's probably going up everywhere.
And I'd argue the same thing. And we had lunch discussions with authors actually. Yes, yeah, but I'm wide, and can I really use that data? And yes, on certain specifics, maybe other keywords are a bit trending a bit more on Kobo than they are here, but that's never been our purpose. Our purpose was to identify these big trends. And if mafia romance is big on the Amazon platform, it probably is or will be at some point in time as the other platforms start mimicking the overall trends that consumers bow to and buy books from.
Agreed. Yeah, for the stuff that I'm doing and trying to understand where the industry's going, even with clients that are, and a lot of folks I work with, we are trying to get less about platforms and more about where we can serve our best customers. And sometimes that's on Kickstarter or direct or Barnes and Noble or print, but when you're trying to understand, is what's going on in my business, or is it what's going on in the genre, or is it what's going on in the overall economy? Those are all important things to know where you're at.
Absolutely. And as for the Amazon platform, there were two statistics over a 10-year horizon, which I was really surprised at. The one is obviously what they do publish, Amazon, is the size of that global Kindle Select Global Fund, which basically represents the royalties paid to those people who went exclusive with their ebook with Kindle. Now that number, we just did the extrapolation for this year. It's going to come out at 680 million just this year alone. We're scratching at 4 billion in 10 years, or it's going to be 10 cumulative $4 billion. And that means this year we're going to see another 15 to 16% growth.
That's crazy. The market's still growing this long.
And that is the 10th year of double-digit growth. Through COVID, after COVID, before COVID, tell me one industry or one channel in an industry that has such sustained long-term double-digit growth rates. I wouldn't be able to name many. Well,
just what you said there. So you're if I heard you right, you said that the COVID boom, whatever you want to call it, after that it still grew beyond that number.
Exactly. So
do you remember offhand like what the growth was, like say 20 versus 2021?
Yeah. So COVID, that was when I think the highest growth number was 19%, and it was from 2020 to 21, or from 19 to 20 to 2020, probably it was.
Yeah.
And then it cooled off a little last year. I think we were down to like, what was it, 14% growth? I mean, we are still talking, there was more than 10%.
Yeah, so
each and every year.
Yeah, because if you go back and look at other e-commerce trends, right? If you just look at general e-commerce trends, like something off of Market Pulse or that, you'd see that bubble, that, you know, that spike in 2020, and then most e-commerce really dropped in its growth, sometimes went negative. Then it's gone back on its regular path of maybe, you know, 4 or 6, 10%, maybe 10% growth at the most in some of those years. But so that this market's actually exceeding e-commerce growth.
Absolutely. So at least for that part of the channel. Now, is the whole market Kindle Unlimited? Of course not. But the second completely striking statistic was that all the major bestsellers, and there is also one for what are the most sold books per year. Now, up until last year, Amazon disclosed the top 400 most sold books for each and every year. So we went back and tracked it all the way back to 1998 for books, and then starting like 2004, 5 for ebooks. Now, for the ebook side of things, get this. You could measure what is the share of Kindle Unlimited titles in that top 400 list for every year. And even in retrospect, there are titles older than 2000 and 10 years back. Mm-hmm. So some of them retroactively have been put in KU if you look at that now. And that share grew from basically 0 to, what it was for 2023, the share of KU titles across the top 400 most sold books on the Amazon platform, Kindle platform. Take a guess.
I'm gonna go with it was 10%.
It's 80%.
80%.
80% of the top 400 most sold books on the Amazon Kindle platform
are in KU.
And since they are the most sold books, and it's both borrows and sales driving sales rank, and we know the numbers of some of the big hitters who are on that thing. Obviously, not all of the revenue they make is page read. A very good deal of the revenue they make is from straight sales as well. But the very fact is that is the share. And it just, I think, underscores the important, whether we talk about Netflix or whether we talk about Prime, subscription models and the content that are part of the subscription is basically it's taking big shares.
So did you do any analysis on how much of those top titles were indie versus trad?
Absolutely. And when we show the chart, just 37% of them don't even have a publisher field filled in. So the safe bet, it's at least 37%. But if you then look into it and see all the LLCs, and we know many of the names, you can safely assume it is way beyond 50% that are released. Way beyond.
Because I think that's the more interesting thing, is that you see that kind of number, especially if there's been growth of that. And, where my brain goes is what a missed opportunity that is for TradPub, because a lot of those folks, they probably sent rejection letters to.
I'm sure they did. And now we are back into a phase of almost like a land grab, where now obviously publishers reach out to these people where they don't have the ebook rights, at least. Hey, can we do your print? Can we do your audio? Can we do your international? And obviously there are a couple of very good players in there doing that game. Mm-hmm. But you can spend a lot of time regretting the past. Yeah. That's the only future. But had they not sent the rejection, they probably would have made more money.
Well, and you and I have talked offline and at conferences in the past and recently that if they're not thinking about how they're going to be using analytics to find those people, like, it's one thing to be, this author's selling hot right now, let's go call them up, but to be able to do the kind of work that you do, that's the game. It's been a while when I'm talking about this Moneyball publishing, that whoever gets that right is going to be a winner.
Absolutely. And I mean, first of all, for the authors themselves, the data we look at, I mean, just take the romance genre, which, by the way, now constitutes 58% of the top 100 on Amazon. Just take those, you start dissecting it, and you say, okay, this here, it's basically 4 or 5 subsegments completely and utterly dominating that romance segment. So you'd be looking, of course, everybody knows romantasy, clear. But would you be able to name the next ones? Well, it's still billionaire romance, it's still mafia romance, it's still rom-com, and then general contemporary romance. So for each of those, we would then obviously go into the data detail and say, who are the players, what are the top books, what is the market share of certain cover types, what are the price points specifically for that type of romance. And I mean, like any business, and we've seen so many of you guys, the indie authors, really treating your business like a business, getting professional about it. You look at the market research and say, yeah, okay, that's what's my cover going to look like, what this is going to look like to serve what the consumer ultimately wants and buys.
Yeah, I mean, I've seeing you've been doing this for a while, and have been getting your reports for some time, seeing how you've matured, and what I was hoping we could kind of talk through is, as you've watched this for 10 years, how have you changed in the kind of reporting you've done, what you've gotten into? I mean, I kind of know the answer, but I'm setting you up for, because I think it's important to understand how you, as somebody who's, a data analyst, is thinking about, now that I can get this information, why it's important.
Yeah. I mean, the evolution was probably like this. We started out very simple, then we got very complicated, and then we got back to more simplicity and what's really relevant for the author. So to make this less abstract, at the very start, the framework was, let's very simply look at supply and demand in certain genres, which at the time where, we started out, when the Kindle platform, in the first year there were about 90,000 titles on Kindle. Now it's 12 million. So it's a big catalog that came on board. So at any point in time, the influx of new titles was a very important measure to understand, is that niche being flooded, or is it some that is underserved, and compare that with some measure of demand. So that is, by the way, still used today in our so-called K-lytics strategy map, that has all the little dots of
the heat map,
the heat map, so to speak. But very quickly, actually, I went down the road being a consultant. We probably went a bit too far ahead and got complicated, because there is still, the measure is still there today. I find it absolutely fascinating. I still look at it. Not all the authors look at it. Perhaps some publishing company will start looking at it. It's the K-lytics Power Index. Hardly anybody looks at it. But what we did was basically say, look, there is the measure of demand as expressed by the sales ranks across a certain set of books. There's a measure of supply. Now, these are the easy part, and one is a bit the opportunity and the other is the risk. But there are other factors that signify opportunity. So what is the growth? What is the price level? What is the price trend? There's also then on the risk side a measure of effort. Is the average book page length in the genre 90 pages or 700 pages? So do you have to write a lot, to be in fantasy, versus short self-help titles would obviously be much less effort. Obviously, authors would argue with me whether page length or book page length is like the one measure of effort. Obviously, it is not, but just to illustrate the point. So we had this compound measure that then gave weighting to, let's give 60% weighting to the opportunity, 40% of the risk, weight all these things. And that led to that one power index where you would have, for example, at the very top, it wasn't actually romance, it was a certain thriller segment, because there the sales are pretty high, but there was less competition, the pricier, healthier. So just to illustrate, we got really complicated, and not everybody was into this sophistication level of a measure. So we still do it, but people look at supply and demand, and then we get into like real hands-on stuff, and that's, I think, where we matured, where people said, okay, tell me, what is the highest selling cover type in romantic comedy? Is it the vector graphic? Is it the guy on the cover of the couple? Is it the sexy couple or the, tamed down, clean romance type of couple? So that's exactly what we now do. Or what is the exact price distribution? Which price point is used the most often versus what's the highest yielding price point? And this is, I think, where we try to mature over time to provide that type of analysis that the author can use both for the writing. So, for example, what is the highest selling trope in a certain niche, or the highest selling character type? Is it the vampire, or is it the shifter, or is it the dragon niche? And that's where we went to, make it more tangible for the marketing and writing decisions for the authors.
I think the other one that I thought was probably pretty powerful one was how you were able to tease out a genre-based sales curve, right? The fact that you could go in and buy a genre report and in it tell you that, like, number one in paranormal romance is this gets to this rank, right, in the store, and that being able to see, tease out all that background noise to understand where that market you're playing in, what it really looks like, how steep that curve is, how where you fit into that curve versus you could be very successful in a genre but feel like you're not doing well in the overall marketplace. But actually, in what your chosen field, where you are very successful, successful.
Yeah, and these are what we call the drop-off curves, and they are very telling for the structure of the market. Where do you operate in? Because it's a complete difference whether you are in game-lit RPG, which now, after 7 years, has finally gotten a bit more in the mainstream as potentially whatever young or growing up gamers also care to read or at least listen to books. And that structure for a long time was, you could make money in lit RPG, but out of 1,000 lit RPG titles, you really had to be the top 10, top 15 lit RPG titles were making some money because you would see them on the Kindle store, some of them even in the top 500, top 1,000, but then the drop-off would be like extremely steep. Compare that to... So your backlist would never make money, right? Only if you are in those top end, you can make money. Compare that to, let's take Cozy Mystery. During its best time, it's been a bit on the decline recently, but during its best time, you had a very shallow drop-off. So even if you were not like in the top 50 of Cozy Mystery, but if you hung out there and you are in the top 1,000, you still would map to the Kindle store in sales ranks between, say, 2,000 and 10,000, 15,000, so there was money to be made. And I think that's important because in some genres, not everybody can be in the very, very top end, can it? Yeah,
and like what I was saying, how steep that curve is. Like, I remember when I was writing my book and the data that you were providing me to see the differences between these different genres, like the curve, the slope of that curve in paranormal romance, the difference between winners and losers in that particular genre was massive.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas in others, it wasn't, right. And that's not to say don't go into a genre. Do go into it. Just like be advised, these are the waters you're choosing to swim in, right? You could look at that two ways. One is it's going to be super hard to differentiate myself and make money, or you could say when I do, the rewards are going to be even bigger.
And that's an important concept, I think, for any author or publisher to look at, being aware of what you're really getting into and understanding the opportunity and risk profile of what you do. Because, of course, you could say, I write literary criticism, for academic nonfiction literature about magical realism. and you probably sell only one book in a decade, but with that you're the number one bestseller.
Right.
Zero risk,
Yeah.
right, from a competitive point of view, but also zero opportunity. And that's obviously an extreme, but I think the opportunity and risk profile of different genres are very different.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with you, that, you to understand the game you're playing, right? It doesn't mean you have to go like, well, I'm only going to do contemporary romance because I went and looked at Alex's reports, and that's where the money is, and I want to make it. And then you find out you don't like to write it.
Exactly. And that's the other point. By now, in many genres, the percentage of serialization is bigger than 90%. Bigger than 90%. Yes, if you do domestic thriller or there you may get away with 60% serialization, but even then, every genre you choose, you're usually in for at least 3 books, if not up to 10, to have a meaningful, marketable product. So unless you love what you write, and unless you have the craft skills for that specific thing, and unless you have the knowledge to be authentic in what you do, it ain't gonna work. You can look at the numbers like, oh, I'm gonna write this, but it ain't gonna work. So take those 3 factors and then overlay it with the numbers, and then the odds of success will significantly rise.
Yeah. Well, and that's really the magic right there, because this is a tough business. There may be people that tell you different, but it's hard. And all we're trying to do at Author Nation, by having folks like you come and talk and share this stuff, is give you the best probability, right?
And that's the right place, is Vegas, because it's all about...
We're all about probability.
It's all about the odds.
Yeah.
The odds of the game.
Yep.
And how do you increase the odds?
Yeah. There's probably some guy out there in the sports book that can really help you figure this stuff out. Just tell him the numbers, and he'll tell you whether he bet on it or not.
Exactly. That's a bit of the same thing.
Yeah.
On what genre do we want to bet?
So what you've, from what you're seeing right now, the latest reports that you've done, what are you seeing some of the bigger trends that authors should be keeping their eyes on?
It's obviously genre dependent. The helicopter view is there is probably one big opportunity, but also flaw baked into the whole Amazon ecosystem, which is what is strong and what converts is going to be displayed even more, and therefore is going to convert and sell even more. And that may be part of the explanation why romance always has been a leading genre. Yes, it may always have had a market share of 45 to 50%. Now on the platform, it has a market share in the top at least of 64%. This year, it's scratched 66, 68%, which is like massive. So there are these self-reinforcing things happen, which basically, and it works the other way too. So science fiction, the sales ranks are on a massive decline ever since the end of the COVID period. So is that because there is consumer demand dropping for sci-fi in general, or is it because the big hitters are going more direct, as you mentioned at the beginning? That's something I cannot tell, but at least on the Amazon platform, it's like a big erosion of that part of the business, just to contrast two extremes.
Yeah, and who knows, like it could be a little bit of both, right?
It could certainly be a little bit of both.
So with the stuff you've got working in the back parts of your lab, and let the folks, kind of get a feel for, what you think is going to be the things that they'll be using K-lytics for in the future.
So in the future, it will probably always be around 2 basic questions. The one is what to write, and the other is what to market, how to market. So a lot of the data can be used a bit strategically about what to write, then in the writing, more tactically, what specific tropes to write. And this is where we, in the lab, start going a little bit deeper into... I couldn't promise that we could go as deep as what are trending micro tropes, which is the big talk right now, because that's very hard to discern just from the metadata and book titles, book descriptions. But we started looking quite a bit massively also into book reviews And there, the readers, sometimes it even say tropes, and it would list certain micro tropes being covered. Now relate that to sales ranks that the books achieve and do it at a massive scale. You would have some information there. So that's the what to write. On the how to market, I think we will just continue to go into, what are the covers, what's the pricing, what are the keywords, what are the best categories that titles use. Never change a winning thing. So that's, and then we have in the making the strategy map, the dots, the heat map that we start looking about very soon. We'll hope to have that actually for the audio market.
Oh, that'll be interesting.
Which will be a very interesting thing to launch. We'd done it once a while back, but sort of then we were probably a bit ahead of the time and the big audio. But now, every genre is looking at audio and its possibilities. So that's going to be one of the developments coming out.
Well, what'll be interesting, here's something for you to think about, and it gets back to what we were talking about before, is on something like science fiction, is what's really happening is those authors aren't necessarily focusing their marketing and work on the things that are going on in print, but they're realizing there's much more opportunity in audio.
Absolutely. And these format shifts, which we also looked at this conference, over multi-years, absolutely fascinating. It's like a breathing system. It's not only going one way. Because we had, ebooks all shoot up through the roof during the pandemic, as an example, and before, then it went down again. And now in big genres, by the way, ebooks have been increasing again. And we see very much over the last 2 years that the losing format has been print in many of the big high-selling genres. That is not to say that print doesn't work in other channels and in the bookstores. One example being teen young adult. Some make a killing on it. In certain formats and certain subgenres, but for the ebook format, it's been massively on the decline.
Well, and there's been other podcasts here where we've talked about print and how people are using print to find younger readers, not older readers, younger readers.
Right. And then obviously all those direct sales and special editions where you have these super fancy products, which are, great new inventions or old inventions now done right and really gotten out to the consumers. Great stuff if it helps the profit.
Yeah. Well, one thing I think, how you presented it was like what to write and, what to market. I think that, when I meet a new author and they're kind of confused on what they want to write, right? I want to do this. I love to write this one. It's like when you get them to understand the concept of writing to market and that is a pathway to success on that particular platform, one of the things I typically will do is point them towards K-lytics because you've done the research. Right? Like you could take 2 or 3 of those reports and look at that and understand things at a macro level that like, okay, based on what I've read now and the things that you've described and the report, your description of those reports that you put out, I'm not going to do paranormal romance. I'm going to do romantasy, right? And have a really good start, right? Like if you really are new at this and you haven't even really thought about covers, like you consolidated that information into one concise place. You want to understand the market in that particular genre and who's publishing what, and is it one author with a breakout book or is it one author with 300 books, right?
Exactly.
Right? There's different ways that there's success composites in that market.
And you allude to also another very important concept, which is probably applicable to any business, is what you do. Do you do it with confidence, or do you do it with a certain wariness and or just hope? And that goes in both directions. Confidence about what to do, but also confidence about what not to do. And when we poll authors who've used the reports, what was the value that you extracted? You, as the provider, you expect, it was that great cover analysis.
It's the power index.
And it's this and it's that. And obviously those are only features, but much of the feedback, what we also get is, now I know exactly what to do, or even we don't have the crest for ball. Sometimes it is, I had a hunch of that is what I wanted to do, but now I do it with 100% confidence.
Yeah.
Or it is, I really wanted to do this, I believed in it, but your number showed me that would have been a complete failed investment.
Yeah.
With super low odds of success. So to take the guesswork out of the game, and in any case, I think Coca-Cola failed big time sometimes with flavors, and you would have hoped they did more market research, so it's probably Coca-Cola is a bad example, but any big successful corporation, before they launch a product, you would assume that there is a bit of market research going into the process before the big investment decision gets a go-ahead or a rejection. Now, you're an author. The most precious good that you have is your creativity and time, and the time it takes to write a book.
Amen. Yeah.
Amen. It's a big investment, so you feel much better writing if you know, hey, I know what I'm going for.
Yeah. Well, that's the like, if it's money, you got probably, even outside of this, you got a way to get that back, right?
Yeah.
Like, lost my money on this book thing, I'm going to go back to work. Time you don't get back.
Time you don't get back.
So, I think that's time well spent when you, whatever it is you decide to do your product analysis before you get going is going to help you, because even as artistic as you want to be, if at any part of that is that you expect another human being to give you money for that, then you need to figure out those if there's economics there that will work, right? You can't just, well, I know this is a great idea, they should pay for it. Well, that might happen.
It might. And sometimes you can also think about it this way. If you are an artist, and you should be an artist, right? Mm-hmm. But if you also have to pay the electricity bill, you may not have the luxury to only be the artist that stretches the boundaries of what is the common agreement of what is needed, wanted, and tolerable,
Yeah.
And in thousands of years of the arts, of course, you need those people who stretch the boundary. I mean, look at jazz music. Where was jazz music in the 20s versus, what did you get through the 80s up to the point now? If you hadn't had those people who stretch the boundaries, go into new harmonies, new ways of fusion, and it wouldn't have happened. Yeah. But by the same token, people have to earn money, and perhaps if you've done a couple of like mainstream type of things, perhaps that gives you the wherewithal to then go into the riskier stuff as well.
Yeah, and I think that what it does is, when you can see that in a report form, is like, you may, and like you gave the example of somebody then having the confidence in doing it, is like, we're not saying don't do what you're thinking about doing, but understand that there's data that says this is what the market is comfortable with buying right now, right?
That is actually a very great attribute, comfortableness.
Yeah.
Or a noun in this case. But how comfortable is the consumer to consume what they want to consume?
Yeah. Well, there's the old Gene Schwartz thing, is like, trying to create demand is a losing proposition, right? Find the unmet desire.
It's a different thing.
Right? And align your product with that.
Yeah.
And it's an easier sell, right? It's like, oh, there's this massive amount of people that want something. You can show that in your report. Can I take what I want to do and make that feel like it's the solution to that unmet desire?
Yeah.
Probably.
And it's always easy to re-explain or re-engineer things in hindsight, right? I mean, one could argue, look at the people who grew up with Harry Potter, and then the desire was romance, but it was in a environment which is whatever, the Magic Academy, the school, and those who saw the Pixar dragon movies, growing up, and the desire for sex and steaminess is still there, but at the same time we had COVID, so I want to have some escapism. Let's put it not in an urban world like paranormal and urban fantasy did. Let's put it into the fantasy world. Let's be more out there. away from this world,
Yeah.
the unmet desire, and yeah, sometimes you wonder, well, what are the kids doing now on whatever Disney, Pixar, and what these channels are, Marvel. Interesting, I thought a couple of years back was the one year where we had the most Marvel movies coming out ever, like 10, 14 movies. And sometimes I wonder, hey, are we going back to where romance was so many years ago with Mr. Clark and Superman?
Yeah.
Will there be superhero romance coming back at some point? And I wouldn't know, but this is a bit of a way of looking at it. What is the unmet desire in the cultural context of that people grew up in to then serve that need? How the big genres probably come about.
Yeah, and if you're a new person and you really are desperate, or not desperate's not the right word, but you're determined to write this particular book, God bless, go write it. It may not land where you think it's going to land. If it's about, listen, I need to get this thing to be commercially successful faster, then you may look at your stuff and say, well, then I need to adjust what I'm going to do a little more this way.
And that's exactly what is happening with some authors who see the reports at the beginning or even through the writing process, where they say, if everybody is now shifting more from the urban to the fantasy, my story is not going to fundamentally change if I package it more into the romantasy realm than into the urban fantasy vampire slayer realm.
Yeah.
It is sometimes a small adjustment to hit what's currently en vogue, for the lack of a better word.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'll say one thing that I've observed, and this isn't a criticism, but it's an observation, and I think it gets to the heart of what's going on in the market. Since you've been doing this, there have been times where I've watched you on stage share data and show opportunities in the market. And because of the way the marketplace works on the author side, on the supply side, where we are listening to somebody like you, that that unmet desire gets filled in about 90 days. Because they see you show them, here's the target, and they all go, I know what to do now. And they go and do it. So that's the other thing to understand is that this is getting to be a more and more sophisticated market with your author community, and there are people that are like, yes, not that they're chasing trends, but they're like, okay, I've been thinking about writing in that space. I have that book already. Like, I wrote it, it's been sitting on the shelf.
Yeah.
And I now understand where that unmet desire is. I'm going to get in there quick, and it moves really quick.
It moves really quick, and I mean, one criticism I also once received, and I was surprised to receive it, but very thankful to receive it because it was almost like a pat on the back, was where what was the genre? But basically the feedback was, so you show these genre reports and now you do the 4th edition of this, the 4th year in a row, or 5th year. Some of the reports, it's now the 7th edition, but let's say this is the 4th edition, and I got the feedback, okay, so this year you're reporting about a rising trend. Have you ever thought about whether just the pure availability of the report and people getting interested about the space, writing in the space, and then putting advertising dollars to that space helped the very upward trend? So is it sometimes a self-fulfilling prophecy? And I say, maybe it is. And if it is, it's great.
Yeah. No, I think there is, this gets back to what you're talking about before, and it's what I've written about in cumulative advantage, and the whole idea of, this is a compounding effect, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, is Berkshire Hathaway a great investor? Didn't they have special knowledge, or is it the fact that they put an investment in something that everyone piles in behind them?
There you go.
Right? Like,
there you go.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the next thing is, but for example, you get requests like, Alex, we've had cozy mystery for years, right? And it's now really getting saturated, and the trend is going back down a little. So this year, show the graph. because I got the request, it's not that Alex has this magic crystal ball. You hear a couple of things, and then I start looking into the numbers. There's things that have also been around for a number of years, but now you see a Google search interest like almost coming out of nowhere a bit for cozy fantasy. And you go like, well, a cozy mystery or a mystery happening. The last 7 years, cozy mystery was all, to the large extent, old ladies solving mysteries in the neighborhood of the confines of the small town. Mm-hmm. Typical cozy mystery setting. Now we have the romantasy trend, so everything is going to a fantasy world. So why wouldn't a cozy mystery from an urban, this world thing potentially transfer to the other things? And we see lit RPG, game lit people go in there. We see people from traditional cozy going in there. It's very, very early. I have no clue where it's going to go. But you could argue, yeah, if just 20 people listen to this podcast and say, wow, that's a cool idea, let me try this.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you have advertising thing that is in 2 years we're going to sit here. Well, didn't we predict the big new trend?
Yeah.
Cozy fantasy.
Maybe. You don't know, right?
We don't know.
Well, this will be the most watched episode ever. And then we'll go out and do predictions and become the Berkshire Hathaway of genre fiction.
That's what we'll do. And then we'll retire.
Yeah. We'll do these from our yacht.
Exactly right.
All right. Well, Alex, it's been awesome having you on. I always have a good time talking to you.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
All right. Before we go, let them know where they can find you, all that good stuff.
Of course. Very easy. Just go to K-lytics.com. It's K-lytics, such as in analytics.com. If you'd like to have an a la carte report, just put /shop. If you want to have a free sample, put free-report, and, off you go. And we're happy to provide you with market intel.
Awesome. Well, safe travels. And I know we're not going to see you at the show this year, but I have a sinking suspicion we'll probably see you in 25.
Yeah. And who knows, perhaps there's this last minute, let's book the flight.
Yeah.
Just get on there.
Just get over there. All right.
Thank you so much.
Man. Bye.
Bye for now.